During the mid-1970s, the Japanese government was looking to replace its aging F-15J starfighters, and eventually its F-4EJ fleet as well. After originally considering a whole bunch of different options, they finally decided on the F-15 and opened up negotiations with both McDonnell Douglas and the United States State Department. An agreement was formed in 1978 where Mitsubishi Heavy Industries would provide the local contract work, and the first few jets would be produced in the United States, with the remainder being assembled in Japan by Mitsubishi. While the production contract went through without really any major problems, there were some significant holdups in relation to a few of the jet's subsystems. The F-15J was basically an F-15C with only minor differences. In particular, the radar warning receiver and the defensive countermeasure system were both swapped out for domestic Japanese equipment, and the integration took additional time. The F-15J also uses a Japanese data link system, but still uses a version of the same Pratt & Whitney F-100 turbofan engines built locally in Japan. The introduction of the F-15J was surprisingly fast for such a major project, and it was relatively trouble-free, with the first deliveries taking place in 1981, and the jet generally being considered operational the following year. The Japanese F-15 fleet has received some upgrades over the years, mainly focusing on its weapons system, and it's expected that they'll remain operational at least into the 2030s. In total, over 200 F-15Js have been built, and Japan is still the largest operator of the F-15 outside of the United States. What we get in Warthunder is the F-15J, a jet fighter in rank 8 of the Japanese tech tree at battle rating 12.3. Being a top-tier jet fighter, this plane has a fully featured combat system with a ballistics computer, the EEGS for air combat, and the JAPR-4 radar warning receiver. This is a very advanced direction-based unit that detects C through J-band signals with 39 threat types on the scope. Its radar is the AN/APG-63. This I-band set has all of the features you'd expect out of a top-tier fighter's radar, with multiple look-down pulse Doppler modes, regular look-up search, IFF, along with BVR and ACM targeting modes. In practice, this is a great radar set with good detection and tracking. For loadouts, the F-15J carries an enormous number of weapons, with up to 8 air-to-air missiles, drop tanks, and dumb bombs in all kinds of different combinations. The plane gets both the AIM-9L and AIM-9M sidewinders. By now, you're probably familiar with these, and the 9M represents an upgrade over the 9L in basically every respect, including IRCCM functionality and basically being a smokeless weapon. New to the F-15J is the AAM-3. This is an all-aspect infrared missile that's very similar to the 9M, but has a higher G-limit and a shorter proximity fuse, so it explodes slightly closer to the targets. It also flies slightly faster and slightly farther, so if you have the choice, the AAM-3 is usually going to be your better option. For medium-range shots, you get the AIM-7M. This is a semi-active radar missile with fairly good target tracking, 25 Gs of pull, and decent range. Despite what the stat card says, in a practical sense, you can reliably get kills out to about 25 or 30 kilometers in realistic combat conditions, but as always, the farther the shot, the easier it is to evade. Note that the 7M will lose jousting matches against the R-27ER. The flight performance of the F-15J is really just outstanding. If you came up to this through the F-4EJ Kai without flying the F-16AJ, it's going to be like learning a new language for the first time. This jet has incredibly strong acceleration and top speed at all altitudes, along with a favorable thrust-to-weight ratio. It gets a pretty effective air brake, but it doesn't have combat flaps, which is fine because you don't really need combat flaps with this jet. That gets us to the main point of contention people have with this plane, its maneuverability and dogfight agility. No matter what anyone tells you, the F-15J absolutely can dogfight like a champion, and hang in there with almost anything else in the game as of making this review. The big secret is managing the balance between your current airspeed and your fuel weight. If you try to turn in at Mach 1.2 with 30 minutes of fuel left, it's going to feel like a container ship, and it would be easy to think this is just a missile truck with no hope in a maneuvering fight. Nothing could be further from the truth. You just have to slow the fuck down and burn some fuel. If you keep this jet at about 1,000 kilometers an hour and burn down to around 16 minutes of gas, you'll find the agility on this jet suddenly opens up, and you'll wonder why your pilot is blacking out almost instantaneously in 12 13G turns that weren't happening barely 30 seconds ago. If you can master those two things, managing your airspeed and hitting combat at a good fuel weight, you'll find this jet highly competitive. Now, to be clear, because I know people don't listen and will twist what I'm saying here, Gripens and stuff can still outrate this jet in most circumstances. But that doesn't mean it isn't maneuverable, or is hopeless in a dogfight, or is hot garbo, or bad, or whatever else they're saying. It just flies different from most other top tier jets, and you have to unlearn the normal Warthunder player's instinct to just lay on the afterburner until your tanks are dry. Get off the throttle when you want to turn, and slow down. Your acceleration is good enough to get back any lost energy pretty quickly if you need it, and you'll thank me later. Taking the F-15J out in air battles is pretty exciting, but I still want to give the usual disclaimer that as of early summer 2024, top-tier air RB is still a chaotic disaster with huge 16v16 matches, so you're frequently going to find yourself being forced to engage against 3, 4, 7, 8, 10 people at a time with absolutely zero room for error and zero decision making. In that chaotic environment, this jet can absolutely still function, you just have to be careful. You've got a really good supply of countermeasures, which will help survivability, and you're going to need to make sure that you can switch weapons quickly to swap between your Sparrows and whichever IR dogfight missile you're using. Because with this many players active and the insane high speed of these jets, the situation is going to be changing constantly, and you've got to be able to adapt in just a split second. The good news is that this jet's performance, systems, and weapons give you the flexibility for almost any kind of top-tier playstyle. If you're careful, you can go in as a brawler, you can do conventional missile truck stuff, you can even climb up to fly top cover. But just remember, the R-27ER will still hit you before any of your own missiles can land on the target, so be careful about that one. Personally, I like to kind of combine different mission profiles with this jet. I start off flying interception, taking a medium-range missile shot or two, flying through engagements without getting sucked in, maybe get a couple of kills, maybe not, and try to position myself to get into more conventional dogfights, timed with my fuel burn, so that I'm at a more advantageous weight when the fight starts. Experiment a bit and find a pattern that works for you. It's also worth mentioning, this jet can do ground pounding with its dumb bombs, but without any smart weapons, it's kinda limited as close air support, and generally I would recommend sticking with air combat using the F-15AJ. Visually, the F-15J is an absolutely beautiful airplane, and you get some really amazing paint jobs for it. I love flying this thing just for its looks, and really, even if it flew like crap, I'd still use it all the time just because it's so fun to look at. Top marks for the visuals on this one, and top marks for the skins. Landing is pretty easy for a top tier jet. You can drop gear at almost 700 kilometers an hour and flaps at around 475. The only real caveat is that it doesn't get a drag chute, so you should expect pretty long landing runs with this jet. The cockpit is excellent, with good visibility, the radar warning receiver in a good spot, the MFD over on the left, and a useful HUD. The forward canopy bracing is slightly lower than I prefer, but overall, the cockpit is still really easy to fly in VR. To close out on the F-15J, this jet has amazing flight performance. It has a good set of air-to-air missiles, it's got a powerful cannon, and tons of countermeasures. However, the lack of a helmet-mounted sight can be a slight disadvantage in furballs. Its energy retention at medium speeds is only average, and it's physically a very large target in a gunfight. The final verdict on the F-15J is that this jet is totally worth the grind, and it's likely to remain competitive in the top-tier meta for a very long time. If you fly the Japanese tech tree, get this jet. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.